Okay, I got a question for you, and anybody who can answer the question gets special spiritual merit. The sermon title is Masculinity, comma, can't live with it, ... past the beer nuts. Who knows the cultural reference? Put your hand up. Yeah, you're cheating, Virginia. Okay, Jeff. Norm and Cheers. So, in the 80s, there was an episode of Cheers. How many people remember Cheers? Oh, a lot of hands. How many people remember Norm, the kind of round guy who sat at the corner of the bar, mostly complaining about his wife, Vera? So there's one episode where, I think her name is Rebecca, who's become the manager of the bar, does something really goofy, and Norm says, "Women, can't live with them? Pass the beer nuts." Which at the time passed as socially acceptable humor. It got a good laugh. It was bounced around amongst at least the young folks I was studying with at the time. But when I told that story to Dana Lynn this week, who is from a different generation, and who kindly pointed out to me in that conversation that I've been ordained longer than she's been alive, she just gasped. And something has altered between the time when that joke could fly on a popular network sitcom and the arrival of your generation. Something deep within our culture has shifted. And you might describe that as some older, embedded forms of male chauvinism or patriarchy have been exposed, and work has been done to scrub that out of our social networks. I don't mean online ones, but in general. And we've encountered that deep shift within Western culture in a number of ways over the years. I can remember encountering it a couple decades ago, in a way that I found quite uncomfortable. I remember coming back from time overseas as overseas personnel living in Fiji, working for the United Church and with partners there. And I returned to Canada, and I started to participate in national committees of the United Church, again, in gatherings of clergy, and in some social locations that were in academia or other spaces. And for the first time, I found myself walking into rooms and knowing deeply, I'm kind of guilty until proven innocent in this room. Walking into rooms and not being listened to in a way that I was accustomed to being listened to. You see, in some of these rooms and some of these social locations, as patriarchy and heterosexism and systemic racism and some other isms were being worked out, guys like me, who are cisgendered, straight, white, privileged men, went from being automatically influential and powerful in rooms to being a little bit suspect, sometimes. And I can remember the first time that happened to me. I can actually picture the room in my head, and I can remember the feeling of anger that started to come up in my body. And this feeling, this isn't fair. Not pausing to think that for the women in the room, And for the queer people in the room, yeah, Judy's already nodding vigorously over there. For the queer people in the room, for the BIPOC and racialized people in the room, this was not an occasional experience. This was a normative experience. And I wasn't going to lose anything except for power in that room. I wasn't going to lose profession. I wasn't going to lose income. I wasn't going to lose education. I wasn't going to lose access to health care. And for many of those other people in the room, they had lost those things based on their social location. And so that anger that was sort of, I could feel coming in my body, but I knew at least enough at that point to just breathe and to try to learn from that situation. I believe that anger amongst mostly straight, mostly white men has spread throughout our society like a flood. And I think with the election of Donald Trump in 2016, millions of men started to believe that they were given license to live out that anger in whatever ways they chose. Now, this is why we picked this song for this week, What an Idiot He Is, by Ashley McIsaac. Now, Ashley McIsaac, being a Cape Bretoner, is unusually prophetic compared to normal human beings. He wrote this song in 1995. I remember my first response to it was, what's he got against Cheese Whiz anyway? But he was seeing something coming. He was describing a toxic male, self-serving, power-hungry, and unleashed on society. Anyone who disagrees with him should be in prison. All he wants is his, even if it isn't. He thinks the only problem is he ain't got more. He wants to get so rich he can buy the whole damn store. He's 1% attention and 99 show. He's always got an answer, even if he doesn't know. The look of recognition on women's faces in this room is remarkable. And part of the reason I thought of this song was the line about the decal on a truck. The moment when I realized most sharply how much this form of toxic masculinity had been unleashed in our society was the moment that Virginia and I were driving to Ontario, to Toronto, where we were starting a new life, where I was going to serve a church in Toronto. We were on the 401, and I was driving, my Camry hybrid. This is not a threatening car. I was driving my Camry hybrid. I pulled out to pass a line of trucks, 18-wheelers. And this guy comes up behind me in one of those big, shiny, black pickups and gets right on my butt. He wants me to pull over. Where am I going to pull over? I'm going to pull over between these two semis that have that much space between them, or these two semis. So I had a natural response. I slowed down a little bit. And I passed them more slowly. And then, as this toxic masculinity was pressurizing the car, I pull in, he goes around me, and a little bit of that toxic masculinity got inside me, and my left arm came up, and a very particular digit arose for him to see. Yeah, not a peace sign. So then I pull over, he pulls in front, and the decal on the back of his truck is one of those skeletons, like you see motorcycle gangs having on their iconography. It's the full length of the back of his pickup truck. It's a fierce skeleton face, 2 arms out, and the digit are rising on both of them. This is how this guy drives around. And he brake checks me, and he slows down, and he puts his arm out and invites me to pull over and fight with him. So I just went around him. And then he went around us at a high speed as close as possible. And then, as Virginia will tell you, we kept meeting this guy over and over and over again. Sometimes the pickup truck was blue, sometimes it was black, sometimes the guy had red hair, sometimes he had white hair, sometimes he had brown hair. But post-trucker convoy, post-Trump, it was like a pandemic of men in pickup trucks unleashed upon southern Ontario. And I kept getting tailgated by them, and then finally somebody pointed out, this is because you have that blue circle on the back of your Camry indicating it's a hybrid, which says you're from the city, you're a liberal, and they're going to aggress you. Well, unfortunately, as a cultural phenomenon, this is much more pervasive than guys in pickup trucks. I mean, just listen to some of these lines by Ashley the Prophet. He thinks his only problem is he ain't got more. He wants to get so rich he can buy the whole damn store. Does that remind you of anybody building a ballroom on the side of the house? Does that remind you of any billionaires? And it's not just on that side of the border. Anyone who disagrees with him should be in prison. All he wants is what is his, even if it isn't. He's 1% attention and 99 show. He's always got the answer, even if he doesn't know. And here's the scary part. Well, I see him everywhere I go, and it gives me a pain. When I see him in the movies, he rattles cellophane. I don't know about that one, really. He's always got a dumb expression on his face. It makes me feel sorry for the human race, because I got a funny feeling he's running the place. And he is. Right now, we sit between this man in Washington and this man in Moscow, each with a nuclear briefcase adjacent to them and the power to blow up this world many times over. And this is their personality, and this is their disposition. And so, while it is really helpful to laugh about this stuff as a catharsis, while I hope that Stephen Colbert finds another forum and we get our late night comedians for a little bit of catharsis, it's incredibly serious. And as Christians, we need to find a way to respond to this not only toxic, but fundamentally nihilistic masculinity, which is spreading like a plague on our planet. Now, the passage that I got Kelly to read today, I picked for 2 reasons. The first one has to do with a character that's easy to miss in the passage. The disciples go to Jesus and say, how do we set up for the Passover? Which is to be Jesus' final meal with them. And he says, go to the gate and follow the, anybody catch it? Man carrying the water jar. Okay. Translate to our context, go to the street and follow the man wearing the red dress. Man didn't. carry water jars. Women carried water jars. This is a little wink to the fact that some serious gender bending is happening. And not just gender bending, but a complete reconfiguration of masculinity. And the person who is to be the guide. And you know, the Gospels are compressed and compact. They don't just drop details like this in. Right? Nobody got to write Gospels the length of a novel. So you pay attention to these details. The person who is the guide of the disciples to their final meal with Jesus is someone profoundly deconstructing manhood in that culture. There's a verb for that kind of reworking. Do you know what the verb is? To queer. Look it up in the dictionaries. To queer means to fundamentally alter the arrangements of a society or a map. Like to queer the map is to change the map so that North America is not bigger than Africa on the map, even though Africa is substantially larger than North America. To queer. That's what's happening. That's what was happening in those rooms I walked into in the early 2000s, expecting to be received as a straight white guy and finding something different. It's because the culture was being queered. And therefore, one of the things we need to be taught is that queering the arrangements is a fundamental part of the gospel. The second thing to be taught is what Jesus did as he went into that room and he took the bread and he broke it and he said, "This is my body broken for you." And when he poured out the wine, he said, "This is my blood shed for you." Do you know, in the masculinity and depiction of a male life at that time, one of the most important things for a man to do in the Mediterranean cultures, whether they be Roman or Jewish or otherwise, was to maintain the integrity of your physical presence. This is why when Roman soldiers wanted to truly humiliate their enemies, what they did is they raped them, women and men. It's an existential violation. A man was supposed to die fighting, even against all odds, before he allowed himself to have the integrity of his physical presence be violated. And what did Jesus do? He did the opposite. He found himself, I don't know at what point Jesus realized he was going to be in a violent confrontation with the Roman authorities and the religious collaborators, and that somebody was going to get killed. I don't know really the moment he realized that, but when he did not reach for the sword, unlike Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane shortly after this meal, lopping off somebody's ear. He said, "I will accept the violation of my body because that will lead to or open to something much more powerful than reaching for the sword." Now, if you were to believe, and this is what I don't get, if you were to believe the white nationalist Christians who are articulating the gospel of manhood today, empathy is an error. Weakness is a sin. Strength is that which is to be worshipped. And Jesus did the opposite. But if you look carefully at the story, Jesus did not abandon any of the core virtues that guide human life and Christian life. He did not abandon strength. He just said, I'm going to exhibit strength in the form of suffering instead of the form of violence. He did not abandon courage. He just said, I am going to exhibit courage in the form of holding to truth as opposed to violence. How much courage did it take to Jesus to go into a room with Herod and later into a room with Pilate and not break and not beg to be saved, but to hold to his truth? How much courage did it take for Jesus to suffer his trials, to carry his cross, to go to Golgotha, and then from the cross to say, God, forgive them, for they know not what to do, which is another virtue, which is the virtue of compassion. You might also call it empathy. A physical embodiment of one of the cardinal virtues, which is wisdom. You see, I think this is the litmus test of when masculinity is healthy or toxic. Toxic masculinity takes a virtue and turns it into a vice. The theologians of Christian nationalism are taking the virtue of empathy, compassion, and turning it into a vice. It also takes vices and turns them into virtues. Gordon Gekko, greed is good. Huh? The collaboration of contemporary economics with this theology is taking vices like greed and turning them into virtues. And so I'm going to look at the men here, although masculinity is not exclusive to men. Masculinity and femininity can be expressed from people of all genders. But I'm mostly looking at men. What are we being called to do by the gospel in this time? It is to be able to live into the dissonance, to be able to live into the fear, to be able to live into the uncertainty of the times while holding to the virtues as we queer social relationships for a more just and peaceful and fruitful future. See, that's where it always goes wrong, and I'll end on this point. Where it always goes wrong is when we feel the tension, we feel the anxiety, we feel all that's wrong in the world. It gets inside our guts and our souls. And in that dissonance, we cannot hold to the virtues. There's an impulse to violence, so we get violent. There's an impulse to blaming, so we blame. There's an impulse to impose pain upon others instead of suffering it for ourselves. It is the inability to be courageous enough and strong enough and prudent enough and wise enough to hold the dissonance inside us and still act out of virtue that leads to toxic masculinity and maybe other kinds of toxicity. And so, friends, men, what's being asked of us now is not to deny the dissonance, not to turn our eyes away from the trouble, but to integrate it and to use the energy of that suffering to live more fiercely into the virtues. And then to reach for partners of all genders and races and backgrounds and religions, and to help queer the social arrangements in a way that are in harmony with those virtues. I look forward to picking up that work with you in the fall.